Good evening, welcome. My name is Nana Baumann, and I am the Senior Advisor for the Arts here at the American Academy. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Ellen Maria Gorison lecture, Landscape and Memory by Dawoud Bey. Before I introduce Dawoud, I would like to briefly share a few words about the fellowship which has made tonight's event possible. The Ellen Maria Gorison Fellowship is named after the elder daughter of Hans and Ludmilla Arnhold. Born in 1916, Ellen Maria spent her teenage years in this very house, the summer house of the Arnhold family. She went on to become a journalist and an early and vocal proponent of the European Union and the United Nations, gleaning public support from Eleanor Roosevelt. Ellen Maria was the only Arnhold family member to live in Germany after the war, in Wiesbaden, though she lived mainly in Paris, New York, and later Uruguay with her husband Fritz. This named fellowship was established in her memory by their daughter Nina von Malzahn, one of the Academy's most generous benefactors. And now about tonight's speakers. Our fellow Dawoud Bey will be in conversation about history and landscape and memory in the American landscape with artist and curator Boaz Levin. Dawoud Bey is a photographer, artist, and educator. Born in New York City, he began his career as a street photographer in 1975 with a series titled Harlem, USA, which was presented in 1979 in his first solo exhibition at the Studio Museum in Harlem. From the outset, his captivating street scenes and intimate portraits centered historically underrepresented Black subjects and communities, rendering them with dignity, complexity, and presence, and deepening our understanding of Black history and visual representation. At the heart of his practice is a profound desire to connect and collaborate with the communities he photographs. Bey has pioneered programs that redefine how artists engage with institutions while striving to make institutional spaces more accessible to the communities they serve. His work Class Pictures from 2002 to 2006 is a striking series of large-scale color portraits and texts of high school students from a wide range of economic, social, and ethnic backgrounds. In this project, Bey collaborated with young people and institutions throughout the United States to produce a diverse collection of portraits that challenge stereotypes of teenagers. His more recent work focuses on the construction of history and collective memory. For example, the Birmingham Project from 2013 is a paired portrait series that memorializes the lives of 6 young African-American children killed in the Ku Klux Klan's bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. For decades, portraiture was Bey's primary mode of expression. Yet, with his project Harlem Redux, done between 2014 and 2017, he shifted away from the human figure and, revisiting Harlem, turned into an urban landscape dramatically transformed by gentrification. Those saturated cityscapes laid the groundwork for the profound shift that followed. In Night Coming Tenderly Black from 2017, a series of large-scale black and white photographs, Bey reimagines the landscape of the Underground Railroad, a network of secret routes and safe houses that aided enslaved African Americans on their path to freedom. Our esteemed American Academy alumna Lee Rayford beautifully described these photographs as so redolent with darkness that they defy the very ontology of photography, the writing with light. These images of fields, foliage, and waterways diffused in darkness venture towards abstraction and are, in her words, neither past nor present, at once abstraction and figuration, both document and fiction. They invite the viewer to inhabit the uncertainty, danger, and possibility embedded in the terrain itself. Bey's photographs and film installations have been exhibited widely across the United States and Europe, including at the Art Institute of Chicago, the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, the Whitney Museum in New York, the Barbican in London, the Denver Art Museum, and the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. Among many honors, he has received the MacArthur Fellowship, so-called Genius Grant in 2017, a Guggenheim Fellowship, an award from the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as 5 honorary doctorates. In 2024, Bey celebrated his induction into the Academy of Arts and Sciences. Bey is Professor Emeritus of Art at Columbia College Chicago, where he taught for 25 years, and currently serves as a critic at the Yale University School of Art, where he received his MFA in 1993. When not in Berlin, he's based in New York City and Chicago. Tonight, he will be in conversation with Boaz Levin. Boaz is a Berlin-based writer, curator, and occasional filmmaker, and the co-head of program at CO Berlin, one of Germany's leading photography institutions. Together with Hito Steyerl and Vera Teumann, he founded the Research Center for Proxy Politics, a research initiative at UDK, Berlin's University of the Arts, that focused on digital networks, proxies, and their role in contemporary politics and media culture. Levin was co-curator of the Biennale für aktuelle Fotografie in 2017, which takes place in Heidelberg, Mannheim, and Ludwigshafen, and of the third Chennai Photo Biennial in 2021. In 2022, he co-curated Mining Photography, the ecological footprint of image production, which opened at Hamburg's Museum für Kunst und Gewerbe, also known as MK&G, and later traveled to several other venues. 2024, he curated the very popular Dream On Berlin the 90s with Annette Hausschild. And he's the curator of the beautifully installed exhibition Dörte Eisfeld Archipelagos that just opened and is currently on view at CO Berlin. Please go and have a look if you have a chance. Levin's writing has been published by Texte zur Kunst, Kamera Austria, Frieze, and Cabinet Magazine. Between 2020 and 2023, he served as editor of Cabinet Magazine's online platform, Kiosk. So thank you, Boaz, for joining us. Before I invite you both to the stage, please allow me to briefly lay out the format for tonight's event. The two will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, after which we will open the discussion to the audience. If you are with us at the Academy and would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and we will bring you a microphone. We do ask you to make sure your question is indeed a question. If you are joining online, you can type your question below the live stream window. Guided by the Academy's mission to promote open and thoughtful exchange and to be a place of serious dialogue, we ask that all conversation tonight, as at all of our events, reflect respect for differing perspectives. Dear Dawoud, dear Boaz, now invite you up to the stage.
Yeah, welcome everyone from my side too, and thanks so much for this really kind invitation. It was relatively spontaneous, but I was immediately incredibly honored. So thank you, Joanna and Nana, and of course Dawoud. It's been such a pleasure to finally meet, and we just thought that we'll really, truly try and jam kind of as a conversation. I didn't prepare any written remarks, though I would have loved to if I had more time. But I did want to share a couple of thoughts, maybe as kind of a springing board for us. I mean, where this invitation landed for me before we start, before Dawoud starts his slideshow. So, as you mentioned, I co-head the program at CO Berlin, and when I started almost 3 years ago, we tried, and my colleague and I, Sophia, who heads the program with me, we tried to think. What I guess that's what you do when you head a program. You kind of start to think of kind of what are our priorities? What are the themes that, how do we see a house for photography? How do we envision a house for image making? What is its role? What do we want to show? What are the questions that drive us? And so we mapped a sort of matrix or a compass maybe for, the themes that we're interested in. Let me know if the sound is okay, or yeah, let us both know. For the themes that we are interested in, and it's not published anywhere. It's something we keep in our mind and occasionally talk about when we have to talk about the institution. But the 4 axes and kind of pillars of the program we describe as the expanded canon, kind of thinking, reevaluating what belongs there and what maybe has been overseen, what should belong, what should be seen, what has been overshadowed. Expanded medium. So what are the boundaries of photography? How is photography translated into space, into sound, into materiality? What is it made out of? The politics of representation. So very, I think, central questions everyone who might look at an image, maybe unbeknownst to them, ask themselves nowadays, or should ask themselves about, who may speak for whom, who has had the right to make an image, what are prescribed roles, what are our, how can we conduct ourselves or define our own roles. And what are the tensions that are between prescribed, that arise between prescribed roles and self presentation. And the last one is what I call against the grain. And whenever I say this to people, no one really understands what I mean by it. It takes some time to explain, but it's basically kind of realizing that a lot of work, rightly so, deals with history and deals with the urgencies of our presence through the lens of the past, or vice versa. And what I realized when I kind of prepared, when I was thinking, I mean, I've long admired Dawoud's work, but I realized like this is all 4, like all 4 of these pillars are very, very present in Dawoud's work, and especially in the in the several series that we will discuss today, that we will see today, that really managed to bridge incredibly sensitive and profound reflection on the medium itself, on the heritage of, let's say, the landscape as a trope, with the question of history and memory. And that is, against the grain comes from this kind of Benjamin quote of having to read history against the grain, and look at the questions behind the answers. And maybe the last thought before we jump in, what I also, Dawoud's work prompted me to think at length about, and especially the title of the lecture, of our conversation, what was planned as a lecture originally. Conversation. Is that it's memory and landscape, not history and landscape, of course. And there's an interesting tension between, what is this demarcation, which we maybe can discuss. But I thought there's a nice quote in a book about memory that comes from an article, I think it was 1884, when there was a trial of Klaus Barbie, a French collaborator, Nazi. I mean, he was actually a German who was responsible for a lot of the terror during the German occupation of France. There was an article, Le Monde published a poll to the readers asking about their feelings about whether Klaus Barbie should be on trial, whether this criminal should be on trial. And they asked, of the 2 following words, forgetting or justice, which is the one that best characterizes your attitude toward the events of this period of the war and occupation? And Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, who wrote a very beautiful book about memory several years later, ends his book by writing, "Can it be that the journalists have stumbled across something more important than they perhaps realized? Is it possible that the antonym of forgetting is not remembering, but justice?" So I think that's maybe for us to kind of jump into this first project in a series of projects dealing with memory, or perhaps with the conversation between memory and history and justice. The
Well, I
Birmingham.
think before I dive into the conversation, first thank all of you for coming out this evening. Thank the Academy for presenting the program, and thank you, Boaz, for participating in this conversation. You know, we've had at least one lengthy conversation, and you know, for me as an artist, all of the work that I have done over a very long time, several decades, comes out of a series of conversations. And so I thought it was most appropriate to the way I think about the production of the work, the context of the work, that rather than me standing at the podium performing in a very singular way, I thought it was more appropriate to engage in this idea, as I do all my exhibitions, by the way. Exhibitions are conversations between an artist and a curator. So I just want to thank you for being a part of this. As far as memory goes, my work around memory actually goes back to a point when I was 11 years old, 1964. And my mother and father went to hear James Baldwin give a talk at the church in New York, where I had grown up, at the church that I grew up in. And after Baldwin's talk, there was a book that was being sold afterwards. And much later, I thought the Baldwin's talk may actually have been a book tour for the purposes of making this book called The Movement available. But after his talk, this book, The Movement, was available. And my parents bought a copy and brought it home. The book, The Movement, was a group of photographs of and about the civil rights movement. And there were a number of horrific photographs in the book, including lynching photographs. And my parents brought this book home, and they didn't tell me with any degree of self-importance or significance that you have to look at this. Because if they did at 11 years old, I probably would have done exactly the opposite. I wouldn't have looked at it. Or maybe I would have found my way to it. But they left the book out, and being as curious as I was at that time, I loved to read, I found my way to the book. And among all of the photographs in the book of and about the violence and the trials and tribulations and triumphs of the civil rights movement, was this photograph of a young girl laying in a hospital bed, wounded in the aftermath of the dynamiting of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And that photograph just kind of seared its way into my psyche. It was the photograph among all of the photographs in that book that haunted me for years and decades after. And I don't know that I intuited at that moment that part of that reason may have been that I was very close in age to the girl in the picture. I don't know that I thought about it that deeply, but I was haunted by that picture for years until eventually I parked it somewhere in my psyche where I managed to forget it. And one morning, about 40 years later, I had a kind of epiphany moment. I was laying in bed, sleep, and I woke up in a start. And it was what you would have called, I just woke up in a start, and this image of this girl, which I had obviously not forgotten, but parked somewhere in my psyche, was shaken loose, and it came back. The expression would be to sit bolt upright. And until that moment, I just thought it was an expression, to sit bolt upright. But I literally sat bolt upright as if someone had smacked me on the back of the head. And the first thing I saw was this image of this girl. The memory just came flooding back. I have no idea what shook it loose. And I was in the midst of the project class pictures, actually. I was in the midst of other work at that moment. But I knew that I needed to go to Birmingham and figure out how to make something of this memory. It felt profoundly like this young girl was calling me. She was calling me to history. She was calling me back.
She was the sole survivor of the attack. I mean, she is the sole survivor. And what year was it that that you were awoken by the memory? Do you remember? Because you work on projects.
Yeah, I'm not able to remember exactly the year, but I saw it when I was 11, and I was at least 50 when that happened, maybe even a little older, because I ended up spending 8 years in Birmingham, visiting, doing research, and trying to figure out how to make something out of that particular history, that memory, how to give some kind of resonant form to that particular history. And it was a very slow process that was as much about becoming familiar with the social landscape and community of Birmingham as it was about the people in that community becoming comfortable with me, even as I was trying to figure out exactly what I might make of that history. And I think after about 8 years visiting sporadically as I was doing other work, I came to the idea for the work, which was initially to make the mythic presence of the 6 young people who had been killed that day less mythic and more palpable, more tangible, which still felt incomplete in some kind of way. And after some long thinking and trying to grapple with how to make work in the contemporary moment that's about the past, and how do you make the past resonate in the contemporary moment. And so I decided to also make photographs of African Americans in Birmingham who were the ages that those 6 young people would have been. The 4 girls who were killed in the dynamiting of the church, and then 2 young African-American boys who were killed later that same day in acts of racist violence that were directly related to the dynamiting of the church. And with that, I decided to make these what became diptych photographs of a young person and an older person, and to put them together in such a way that each piece embodied 50 years. Because I was making this work 50 years after the moment of this tragedy. So this work became the first time that I began to figure out how to give form to this idea of creating a liminal space that's both past and present, and to make history resonate through the work, so that when one stands in front of it, there's a kind of profound witnessing of history, even as one is standing in the space of the present.
And in that, you also slightly, I mean, I think you talk about it in one of the interviews I saw about the project. You talk about the fact that you were even surprised yourself to learn about these 2 other victims who were killed that day, because in the official historiography of the event, it's known as the bombing of the church. So in that, there was also a intervention.
Yeah, that came out of research that I did. I spent time doing research at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. And during one of those times that I spent researching there, I was not aware that these 2 boys had been killed on that same day in separate incidents of violence. One of them was killed in the streets downtown Birmingham by a police officer who said he saw him throwing rocks at a car, and he called him and he walked away and he shot him in the back. The other was 2 brothers who had just finished delivering their Sunday papers, and they were on the way home, and they encountered 2 young white boys riding a small motor scooter. One of them had gone home and gotten a pistol and tucked it into his waist. Because after the dynamiting of the church, the white citizens of Birmingham were celebrating. There was a large rally held on the football field at the local high school. And these 2 young white teenagers were looking to continue the mayhem of that morning. And the 2 black brothers were riding on one bicycle. It's almost Shakespearean in its symmetry. 2 young black boys on a bicycle, 2 young white boys on a motor scooter, and they're coming towards each other. And as the motor scooter got closer, one of the boys pulled a pistol out and shot the younger brother, Virgil, there, and he died in his brother's arm. And I only knew these stories from research that I had done. Most people know about the 4 girls. And of course, Spike Lee made a movie, The 4 Little Girls. And if people know anything about that particular piece of history, that's what they know. But I very intentionally didn't go there to make work about what I thought I knew, as much as to do research, spend time there, and really do a deep dive into the history, and then make work out of that.
I guess from the pairs, the older protagonists were similar age as you, because you were similar age as the girl in a way. So there was also, I guess, did you think of this, some sort of sense as I guess thinking of how Baldwin's Fire Next Time is an epistolary letter to his nephew,
Yeah,
what were you
one
thinking this?
of the things that was tragically ironic about the time that I was in Birmingham making this work was that it was the very same moment that Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida. So even as I was making work about what had been a historical moment, that history was still tragically playing out in the contemporary moment. The only other thing I can say about this work, without spending too much time, is that the work came out of approaching the Birmingham Museum of Art with the idea for the project that would be a project and in the end an exhibition. Through the museum's education department, I was put in touch with different schools in Birmingham. I spent a lot of time visiting the schools, looking for subjects, young subjects, meeting with different groups to introduce myself and to ask people if they were interested in participating in being photographed. And it was kind of daunting because I didn't want to just photograph older and young people from Birmingham. For it to resonate for me, I wanted them to be exactly the ages of those 6 young people and exactly the ages that they would have been 50 years later at the time the exhibition opened. So there was a whole series of engagements that went into the work. The other piece, the 2 locations in which the work was made. One of the locations was Bethel Baptist Church, which had been a very activist church in the civil rights movement. And the other location was the Birmingham Museum of Art itself, which at that time, like all public institutions in Birmingham, was a segregated institutional space. So I wanted to use those 2 spaces as representative of those 2 aspects of Birmingham's social history and make those sites of social history the places where the photographs were made, segregated public institution and the Black communal space of the church.
And I mean, I think this is, as is the case throughout these series, the work was shown there first and produced for that kind of for those institutions, for those local institutions, which I think is very important in this type of work and generally. And also, you mentioned to me how the entire, for you, the process, I mean, the years you spent engaging with the community, the years you spent reaching out to these schools, the people you met, everything that's kind of left outside the frame, proverbially, was, belonged as much to the work as did the as to the images that we see.
And the final piece of it was that the exhibition was mounted in the once segregated space of the Birmingham Museum of Art when it was completed. So, these projects have multiple parts to them. There's an institutional intervention going on. There's a conversation around expanding ideas of photographic representation, making photographs that are not, as the tradition of photography would hold, about a single moment, but making work that actually about multiple moments combined as a way of extending the notion of time in the still photograph. There's of my projects, there's within the making of the work. And the work itself is all of that, the institutional piece, the photographic piece, the relationship piece. Yeah.
And I was going to ask about the timing, but I guess the story of Trayvon Martin, that's it's all that explains maybe part of it. But I was wondering about, in a sense, this work is a sort of transitional work between previous bodies of works of yours, which were predominantly, let's say, very much focusing around portraiture, and what followed. But I wonder if there was, could you point out towards to a specific point in this process working on Birmingham that then led you to ask the questions that would lead you to the next work and to grappling with landscape more?
Because the Birmingham project was the first project in which I began to engage intentionally with the idea of history. And because at that time I was still working primarily within the space of the portrait became the shape of the work. But unlike previous portraits that I had made in which the individual was giving voice to their self-presence in the world, the portraits for the Birmingham project were actually portraits of individuals who simultaneously represented the contemporary Black community in Birmingham, but they also represented those who were no longer present. It was a project about the present, and it was also simultaneously a memorial project. And everyone who participated in and agreed to sit for the portraits understood, the conceptual shape of the work. Yeah, we can't go into it too deeply here, but I also completed a film, but we can show films with the more recent landscape. Yeah.
And with this, this work was the first where you really, I guess, started embracing this genre of the landscape as as your primary means, but also pushing against the boundaries of what how the the landscape has been photographically depicted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was, while I was working on the Birmingham project, my assistant and I were also doing a lot of driving around Birmingham, looking at the landscape of the city. And I had thought about making a second group of photographs in Birmingham that were about that landscape. But between completing that project, meeting the deadline for the exhibition, assembling a film crew, and editing, and then making the film ready for the exhibition, the idea of doing extended and different kinds of work in Birmingham didn't happen. But later, with the work in Ohio, in northeastern Ohio, through the invitation of the Front Triennial in Cleveland, I had the opportunity to continue this idea of looking at the past from the vantage point of the present, and the conceptual beginning of that work, which you see here, that I began to think about the history in northeastern Ohio, which quickly led me to the role of fugitivity and the Underground Railroad in northeastern Ohio as fugitive African Americans escaping slavery made their way to Lake Erie and then on to Canada. And I thought about, because interestingly enough, he had lived in Ohio for a time, Langston Hughes, and his poem, Dream Variations, and the last couplet of that poem, which I've excerpted here, was night coming tenderly, black like me. And as I thought about this idea of this kind of the tender embrace of blackness, night coming tenderly, black like me. It wasn't night coming threateningly, night coming imposingly. It was night coming tenderly, black like me, which led me back to Roy DeCarava's photograph. This idea of the black subject, the black narrative, and then the materiality, the blackness of materiality of the photographic object. I thought that DeCarava and Langston Hughes' poem were in conversation with each other, and they became the conceptual foundation for the work, and of which I lifted the title partially from the poem, Night Coming Tenderly Black. And it's about the blackness of the narrative of fugitivity, the black subject, and then the blackness of the materiality, collapsing all of those things into a single photographic object.
Seeing the night, I mean, night is kind of obvious as in the poem as almost, as a time that protects, the fugitive, and allows them to escape. But I find it's very, I mean, you all have to see these images in real life because the blacks are incredibly striking. The materiality is, it's a huge disservice to it, but I'm just gonna gush about it and encourage you to see it in real life at some point.
Yeah, it's hard to approximate what this
Yes.
work looks like in slide form.
They're quite
Especially,
large.
especially with the light of the projector bulb behind it, But they're very dark, and they require standing in front of and giving your eyes time to adjust. You have to look into the blackness of the photographic print, and then the narrative and the image begins to emerge out of that. So all of these are very, what do we call them, rough approximations of the photographic object, perhaps.
Yeah, but it's remarkable that, I mean, materiality plays a role, the scale plays a role, and it's essential to the form you chose. We showed one at CO a year ago, and a part of Tyler Mitchell's show. For those of you who might have seen it, I wish this was real. So there was one out of this series, and it's really quite remarkable to see. But I think, I mean, there's also the landscape as a genre, as a motif, as an ideology. I mean, I think there was Leo Marx once wrote about the pastoral as the American ideology, or the embodiment of American ideology in what it showed, but also in what it obscured. What it left out, the pastoral as kind of the worked landscape.
Yeah, and all of these photographs are also made from an eye-level vantage point, which is meant to suggest the way that this landscape looked through the eyes of the fugitive black bodies moving through this landscape, what it looked like, what it felt like, and what it meant to be under cover of relative darkness, moving towards, self-liberation under cover of darkness. these fugitive, formerly enslaved African Americans moved through the northeastern Ohio landscape. The other material thing that I can say about these, it's less apparent looking at the work in this form, but much like Roy D. Carava's photographs, which are dark but weren't necessarily made under circumstances of darkness, that blackness is a material interpretation of the subject. So these photographs were not made under cover of darkness. They were not made at nighttime. They were printed for the appearance of the idea in the photograph. So this work, among other things, it's kind of my, it's very much, in addition to the larger narrative, it's very much my conversation with Roy D. Carava.
And also interestingly, we spoke about this briefly also with different figures, from the canon and different historic. I mean, Paul Strand with the picket fence comes to mind. Very different picket fence. And Alfred Steiglitz, you mentioned when we the lake. I think one of the previous images, where so there's also again this kind of pastoral landscape that's being.
Yeah, it's a conversation with the history of landscape photography. That first photograph that I showed, the white picket fence. Some of you who know the history of photography probably know Paul Strand's white picket fence. Probably the most well-known white picket fence photograph in the history of the medium.
16.
But, so it's speaking back to the history as well, but saying something else. Paul Strand wasn't talking about what I'm talking about, even though we're using similar forms, So I think one of the things that I've been very much aware of as I've continued this work is that there hasn't been a very strong Black presence in the history of landscape photography. And in the US, that goes back to the 19th century Western Survey photographs up to the present. So I'm very intentionally trying to engage that history and to insert a narrative of Blackness into the history of the genre of the medium of landscape photography. The other thing that I should say about these, even as I describe them as from the vantage point of those Black bodies moving through this space, when people say to me that, Dawoud, you've stopped making portraits. There are no people in the photograph. And to me, there are people in these photographs. They've just moved from being here to back here. And now they're looking out into the landscape. But they're very much informed and shaped by a strong suggestion of human presence, even though they're no longer in front of the camera. But I'm picturing the landscape as if through the eyes of those unseen Black bodies, which for me are very present.
And increasingly also present in the following works and in your audio, in different forms in the audiovisual work that, we'll see later. Also in also as sound, as a soundscape.
Yeah, I had intended with this project, because the more I continued making this work, I began to think about the imagined sound of history. What might the layered sound of history be? I wasn't able to put together a film crew while I was working in Ohio. I met with one director, it just didn't feel right, so I just tabled the idea of making a film in this landscape, which I did do for the next two projects. But for me, certainly standing at the edge of Lake Erie, it's as much a sonic experience as it is a visual one. And I've been making films. I was something of a closet filmmaker since grad school. And eventually I decided to go ahead and to more forcefully embrace that as part of my practice.
Here you get a sense of what the images actually look like. I mean, the tone on how dark it is and how much it kind of sucks the light from the room. No, it's almost yeah.
Yeah, this is where that work was first shown. And this is St. John's Episcopal Church in Cleveland, Ohio, which was the final stop on the Underground Railroad as fugitive. Formerly, you know about it?
No, I just, as you're talking.
Yeah, so this is the final destination before fugitive African Americans would go up to the bell tower to watch for the signal from Lake Erie that it was safe to continue. So I was fortunate enough when this work was completed to be able to situate the work in a site that was an actual site of the history that I was making work about. And then it went into the space of the museum when I had the first exhibition of this project at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's the first time it went into a conventional white wall space. And I needed to bring something else into that space. I needed to bring the church back into that space of the museum. I needed to bring the spirit and the sonic piece of history into the exhibition space. So I commissioned a friend of mine, a vocalist and musicologist, Imani Uzuri, to do a performance responding to and performing with and to the photographs in the exhibition. We later went on to.
So she collaborated on your
Right, we did a film.
project.
We did a film together, but this was again a way of reshaping the space of the museum into a space not merely of display, but to bring the sonic and the performative piece of the history into the space of the museum. They had originally wanted to do it as a program in the auditorium, and I was like, no,
It has to be
that's
everywhere
not
else.
what I'm talking about, because obviously this idea of someone performing in the gallery, but that's my ongoing conversation with institutions, is reshaping them, getting them to, exist in ways beyond the ways in which they conceive of themselves.
Outside the comfort zone to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And
moving from fugitivity, the next project was to the place from which fugitive African Americans were seeking their fugitivity, the plantation. And I started working on that work in Louisiana. And sometime in the midst of working on that, I was approached by Prospect, New Orleans, who were that year commissioning work for what was going to be a citywide exhibition called Yesterday We Said Tomorrow. And in conversation with the two curators, they realized that the work that I was making thematically was very much about the ideas that they were hoping to engage. So I started making, photographing on and around the landscape of 5 different plantation landscapes in Louisiana.
And in terms of, I mean, going back to to the first, to Birmingham, to the first project that originated this, in terms of the, I mean, this series, or this interest and this preoccupation with history. Of course, the image that brought this about was incredibly violent. And I wonder, I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you think about the violent image and its role in spurring these projects, and how you've been navigating this question of representation of violence. I mean, in this history, moved from the Underground Railroad to Louisiana and to the plantations.
Well, certainly from the outset, violence has kind of hovered over the African American experience in America. And one thing that I think is interesting in that regard, particularly in relation to the plantation experience, which was one of degradation, enslavement, violence, forced labor. And then at the same time, there's a wealth of traditions that sprang from the plantation. Black culinary traditions, Black literary traditions, liturgical traditions. There's a wealth of history that managed to emerge in the midst of that profoundly violent, demeaning experience. So I'm always certainly in this situation, being in the landscapes, and this particular landscape where I spent the most time photographing at Evergreen. It's the most intact plantation landscape in the country. It sits as it has since the 1700s, when this particular plantation was built by the enslaved Africans who then worked that plantation. Yeah, so there's this, but the question of violence certainly hovers over the African American experience, the violence of the initial experience of enslavement certainly continues to manifest itself. That profound disregard for a Black personhood and Black bodies, whether it's children or otherwise, is something that is an inescapable part of the historical narrative. I don't know how much time we have.
That was, I was about to say, I'm mindful of the time, and we are, I think, time is more or less over. So, but I were wondering if we should just do the last section with open to the audience so that you can, I mean, we open the floor to the audience and maybe slowly you kind of go through the images in the background. Does that make sense? What do you think? Because we do want to leave time for questions, but maybe we can also still have.
Yeah, we've talked about the sonic piece.
Yeah.
This is the film that was made on the side of Evergreen Plantation.
So after the film, maybe I'll open it up, and if you have questions, just put up your hand.
And this is again Imani Uzuri, who first performed through the photograph. And then I had her come back. Okay. Let me see if I can move this ahead to the last section. And then we give you guys a chance to this is the most recent work, which then goes back to the site of the initial encounter between enslaved Africans in America and Virginia. This work was made in Richmond, Virginia, along what's called the Richmond Slave Trail, which is the site upon which upwards of 350,000 enslaved Africans were walked into their first encounter with America. This is their first encounter on land after that long journey of captivity. And again, I'm looking at this landscape, this trail, the foreignness of it, trying to take in for the first time this experience of being in this unknown place where after thousands of horrific miles of journeying.
And again, there's a sense that the works are very embodied, that they are immersive, the materiality is very present. You stand kind of in awe in front of them, as are the films also. The kind of immersive nature of the work is also, I think, essential to it. We'd love to give you a chance to ask some questions, and we can watch the. Oh yeah, you want to? Should we also watch the?
Then I'll just give you a brief listen to this. The soundtrack for this, The Sonic Landscape, is a collaboration with the choreographer, Gaynell Sherrod. And the idea comes out of imagining the layered sound of 350,000 pairs of feet along with the accumulation of sound going forth from that history, and then recording ambient sound, and just creating a cacophony of sound that becomes the imaginary sound of history from that moment forward.
You used a special lens too, right? Were you using a special lens? Was it a...
Absolutely. Yeah. It's called a Petro lens. Originally made in 1934 for silent movies, for filming dream sequences in silent movies where things all of a sudden get kind of fuzzy. And I described to the producer that I was working with, who put together the film crew for me in Richmond. We had several meetings, and I described to him optically what I wanted the image to look like. And this wonderfully geeky filmmaker who has the whole history of film and lenses and the material of film, he said, I know what you need. He said, let me see if we can rent one for a couple of weeks to do this. And on the first day on set, when we were ready to start filming, he came on set with this box, and the whole crew gathered around. It was like a holy grail kind of moment. And he opened it up, and it was this 1934 Petro lens, mounted on a new mount so that it could be, used with the camera. But definitely the optical quality is very, very, very specific. And it's the result of using that particular lens. I had tried to do it with a film that I made in Birmingham. It wasn't extreme enough. I know enough about lenses to know that, if you open it up all the way and get a longer lens, you can get a shallower depth of field, but that wasn't quite the quality that I was looking for. So I was fortunate to find this particular producer who, put together a great crew for me, and I'm looking forward to working with him again.
Maybe in Berlin. Thank you so much, Dawoud. And
Okay.
now we have the time for...
Thank you. Yeah, and for those of you who are curious about what I've been doing here, the history that I'm looking to engage here, I've been thinking about the Berlin Conference, 1884, 1885, the conference of 14 European nations that was held here in Berlin, that was convened to basically divide the African continent. It's the moment of the beginning of African colonialism.
Yeah, the scramble for Africa that
Yeah.
was described.
Yeah, Berlin, well, the city was founded 1871. So the city was basically, they were looking for resources. They were looking for resources. There was already an individual run on resources in Africa by individual European countries. And so they convened in 1884 to collectively pretty much figure out the seizing of the African continent and its resources in order to build both this city and to build, to use those resources to build those emerging European capitals and cities.
eventually led to the genocide in Namibia, among many other horrors, in the case of Germany. Exactly.
Yeah, I can't say too much about what I'm going to do with all of this. I'm in information gathering, research, looking at exactly what the Berlin looked like in the late 1900s, why the Berlin come to look the way it looks. It turns out to be largely the work of the architect Schinkel, who reshaped and built the modern city of Berlin. And looking at the reverberations in Berlin of colonialism as those colonized African populations begin to actually make their presence known here in Berlin. So this is all research, exactly as it says here, it's to be continued. What I make of this conceptually, materially, formally, I don't know. But, we've talked about, I've mentioned it to other people. Whatever it is definitely something that's going to require me, as I have with all of my other projects, coming back to Berlin and staying here for a while to figure this out. I've never made a project in 5 months.
Yeah, as you've noticed, most of the projects were 5 years,
Birmingham
8 years.
was 8 years. I completed the work on the 10th. Richmond was 4 years. I mean, they're years in the making, while I just keep gathering, having conversations.
We can look forward to having you here often.
Yeah, trying to figure out how to give it some kind of first conceptual form. Because in terms of my work, I'm, in a very real sense, I'm a poet. I'm not an essayist. I'm very much a poet. The work is very concise and engages in a particular kind of visual poetic around things that are very problematic or very fraught. But the work itself is not meant to be very specific in a highly discursive kind of way. It's meant to create that discursive conversation, but in the embodiment of the work itself. Because all the projects I've done, at the completion of those projects, is a set of relationships, a set of public conversations, publications with different writers bringing different discursive vantage points and amplifications to the work. So, like it says, it's to be continued. Thank you.
I think we have time. I've been signaled time for 2 questions. Went slightly over time. Yeah, we have 2 questions here.
Hi, I'm going to be really annoying, and not sorry for saying something and not actually having a question, but I just need to I just really need to say thank you so much, Dawoud, for your work, what it means to be a Black person and to have grown up in urban spaces, but to experience landscape from a position of Blackness, and to understand how coming from the Caribbean originally and then Britain to see and being very urbanized and seeing your work through portraits of urban portraits to then seeing your work in landscape, what that does for us and how important it is. And now being in Germany, living here for a long time and excited to what you're going to do as it's being continued. But that landscape work is deeply enriching for us and highly important because we came from landscapes where we were farming and agriculture, and we were moved onto landscapes by force and brutality and genocide, in which our ancestors were forced to live on these lands, and then we were moved for economic purposes to urban environments where we're also told that we don't belong. And so these ideas of belonging through landscape is absolutely incredible to see through your work. And I'm going to ask a question. I'm wondering, how can what you're really looking at is access, right? Like, what do we do when we have access and discovery? And so it's not just landscape and memory, but it's access and discovery. That's what I was seeing through your presentation today, which was wonderful. How do we access this outside of the sort of institutions? It's, how do we, on one hand, educate whiteness, but more importantly than educating whiteness for institutions is how do we inspire our own people, as I've been inspired today and continue to be just inspired by your work? How do we really continue that access through our landscapes?
Well, I alone don't have an answer to that, obviously. But I will say that after the completion of the work in Richmond, Virginia, and we planned it from the outset, there was a 2-day symposium with both people who were on the ground addressing those questions in Richmond, Virginia, as well as other people that we brought in to have a 2-day conversation about exactly that, which is why, for me, in the presentation of the work, you know, programming around the work, conversation around the work is absolutely essential to me. The work is made to provoke conversation, to address exactly the kinds of issues that you raised. We don't have time tonight, but I can, you and I I can tell you one very interesting and profound outcome of that Richmond Symposium. That was a very real answer to how some of these contested issues around land history can be engaged. So for me, those are the kind of questions that I intend for the work to provoke. I've had at least 2 conversations here in Berlin with people from Berlin who never heard of the Berlin Conference. So I suspect that history is worth a conversation here for sure. And all of the contemporary reverberations of that history.
Yeah.
Dawoud, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
That was so beautiful. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more just about, let me see if I can articulate this, because I'm thinking of Rachel's presentation from last week where she was talking about time and these parallels and mirrorings and images across time. And so I couldn't help looking at your photographs and thinking about that moment you spoke of being sitting up bolt upright, decades after witnessing this image of this young girl from Birmingham, and how that called you into this set of photographs, which to me felt not only were they portraits of people in that town, but they felt to me a way that you were looking at yourself and trying to make sense of these things that you were feeling or reckoning with in terms of history and who you were. And so for me, I'm wondering if you could talk more about how you envision time working through your photographs, because I mean, Sontag would say photographs force time to be still. But what I sense in yours, even with the lens that you're using, and especially in the moving film, is that it's a circular motion. But I'd love to hear you talk more about the way time moves through these images.
Well, it's interesting because my conception of time when I'm making the work, like when I was in Richmond, standing on that trail, the way I think about my place in time, I'm kind of standing here, and I'm facing the past. I'm actually I'm looking into the past. That's what I'm making. That's what I'm photographing. You know. So, and I'm standing kind of in the middle of the past, and behind me is the present, of which I want no evidence to appear in the photograph. So I'm literally, when I make that work, I'm kind of standing in that space between the present and the past. But what I'm looking at and what I'm sensing and what I'm trying to make sense of and what I'm trying to inhabit is the past that I'm photographing. So that when you look at the work puts you there as well. So it's a kind of a suspended sense of time, you know. But I'm highly attuned to the fact that I'm looking at the past. I don't think about the present. You know, I kind of think about it when I'm standing there, but then when I look through that thing, I'm peering into the past, and that's really what I'm seeing, thinking, feeling, and trying to figure out how to amplify.
You told me this wonderful story about the lady who you remember.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because most artists don't get to see. We have a set of ideas, and then the work goes public, and we're not often privileged to exactly how the work is working on the viewer when they stand in front of it. I'm of the mind that whatever experience you bring to the work, it's not wrong. That's your experience. It's entirely subjective. As long as you don't attribute those feelings to me. If it reminded me of your grandmother or the landscape of your grandmother's, behind her house, that's right. That's right for you. But, I always say that, every work, every art object is going to provoke, as many different responses as there are people who stand in front of it. Somewhere in there, you hope that your intentions are part of the equation of that response. You can't insist on it, but you hope. And so Boaz is describing an experience that I had at the Art Institute of Chicago. And Night Coming Tenderly Black was up. You saw the pictures, and then you saw Imani Uzuri performing to them. And I stopped by the museum to see the curator. The head of photography at the Art Institute, Matt Witkowski. And so Matt and I walked into the gallery, and I'm always very self-conscious about walking into a space when my work is up, because I think about artists like Saul LeWitt, who refused to be photographed. He didn't want his persona to influence the work at all. So it's not something that I make a habit of. But for whatever reason, me and Matt are going into the gallery, and there are two women standing there looking at the work. One of them is looking at it very closely. And me and Matt are keeping our voices down, but she felt our presence, and she looked up and she saw me, and she was clearly startled. I had done enough PR for the show. She probably saw my face in the newspapers, or she recognized me as the person that made the work. And she was momentarily confused. She looked at me, and she looked at me, and then she said, but very hesitatingly, she said, but you're the person that made these photographs, right? And I said, yes. But you made them now, right? She's trying to get her, she's trying to get herself resituated in time. Because obviously the photograph has pulled her into the past. And now, what am I doing walking around here? You know? So she said, but you made these, right? But you made them now. And I said, yes. And she was just completely, so I realized I needed to throw her a life raft. So I said, yes, I made them 2 years ago. I made them in Northeastern Ohio. Nice to meet you, yada, 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 yada. Just for her to get reoriented, because she clearly, she was wherever the work took her. And it didn't take into account that the photographer was alive and walking around, you know. And the other thing that I didn't mention about all of this history-based work is the use of black and white material. I did talk about it in relation to Decarava, but they're all black and white because the materiality of black and white is the material of photography's history. They're large scale so that they can actually, in a sense, be inhabited. If you stand close to it, your field of vision is doesn't allow for experiencing anything there. But a black and white photographic object is very different from a large scale color photograph. That's a very contemporary thing. But there's something about the materiality of black and white, which is what photography began as, that's consistent with my idea about making work about history, using to some degree the material of that history. Yeah, but that woman she was someplace else.
I see there's another question there.
One last short question from a young person in the back.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you. You mentioned before that the landscapes that you photographed had a strong suggestion of human presence in the photos. And since the location itself was so historically charged, would you say that the photograph acts as a portrait, showing what the landscape looks like without the people that were once there?
You can repeat this.
Would you say that the photographs act as a portrait? What was the second part? So as a portrait, when the people weren't?
Yes.
Was the people not present?
Yeah. So
kind of embodying
if the photographs acted as a portrait in relation to the portraits of people that you previously took, as if the landscape that you're photographing is technically a portrait, but without the people that were once there.
Yeah. Do you see these landscapes also as portraits? With regard to your previous work, are these portraits of the people who are not present, who are absent? The landscape works. These are the land we're talking about.
I'm not following this question.
Whether do you see the landscape photos as portraits as well? Do you perceive them? Because you did talk about how the bodies are present. You, I think, described it as they're present behind, looking in, right? But do you see them also as portraits in some way? Is that?
I don't know. It's one of the things that is really, really interesting, especially thinking about the more recent work, is how what I would call the structural geometry of the landscape changes. If you look at it going this way, or if you keep going and you turn around and look back at it, it's very different. And a lot of the process of making the work has to do with that kind of shifting positionality in relation to trying to take what might seemingly be unruly, unordered, not quite cohesive, but finding the coherent form within space, which all spaces kind of have it. You have to find it. You have to stand in the right place in order for the space to, I guess, reveal itself to you in the most coherent way, formally, because part of the challenge part of the challenge of working the way I do is that I'm always confronted with the immovable, unchanging, rectangular space of the frame. It never changes. And I'm really committed to making work that is about the thing that you see, the discipline and the rigor. If this is the photograph, that's the thing that you print. If it needs to be a little less that, you come over this way. If it needs to be a little whatever. But, within my own practice and training, that kind of rigor of seeing is kind of foundational. So what you see in the photographs is pretty much exactly what I was seeing through the viewfinder. Because before I started working with the camera that I'm working with now, I was using, I photographed for a long time with a view camera on a tripod. The camera's still on a tripod for that kind of rigor and specificity of framing. And I don't know if this gets at your question at all, but the landscape changes as you move through it. And its history remains intact as you move through it. The question is, where can you stand to most coherently reveal the space that you're in, to create the most resonant experience of place and observation through where you choose to stand. But I'm acutely aware that going this way and looking back, because photographing in Richmond, it was only like 1.5 miles long. The remnant of the slave trail from the docks to the holding pens is just 3 miles. So I had like 1.5 miles by I don't know, it wasn't even 6 feet wide, so maybe 5 feet wide. So you really need to be attuned to the subtle differences in the landscape that can be amplified either optically, formally, or in the printing, somehow to use the medium, I guess is the best way to say it, to use the medium to most coherently reveal, most coherently and resonantly, somehow to make that space resonate through the materials and through the form.
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks for the question.
Thank you.